In the museum basement, a brass caliper stays locked at 17.28 centimeters beside the tide-battered letter. Archivists breathed its sea salt and carbon paper trace, proving a floating stranger's false plans could steer armies. D-Day listened. If this quiet intrigue soothes you, gently subscribe for more Nightfall histories. Drift close. Beneath a shade of green canvas in a cramped London morgue, a junior pathologist named Cynthia bent over the borrowed face of Glinda Michael, the Welsh drifter, whose lifeless weight would be repurposed into Major William Martin. The lamplight trembled through gauze taped over the windows, and each tool on her tray looked both surgical and theatrical. Bone forceps warm from her palm, wax pencils softened over a stovetop, silk thread pulling through the shrouded skin with the hush of fabric. She dabbed benzaldehyde along the moustache to mimic a naval officer's cologne, tasting its bitterness when the fumes settled on her lips. Nearby, a Royal Navy paymaster rehearsed the invented biography, his voice brushed with cigarette ash, pausing whenever the building's plumbing groaned. Their fingertips lingered on ration booklets, theatre stubs, and the tiny multilingual ID card whose ink still glistened. The chilly room smelled of paraffin-heated kettles, a reminder that improvisation guided every improvised ritual. Outside, tram wheels squealed along wet cobbles, underscoring how ordinary city rhythms continued as this clandestine resurrection took shape. In that cramped moment, the corpse ceased to be anonymous. It became a vessel tuned to deceive. Evidence accumulated with the weight of soaked wool, and each item carried its own temperature. The black attaché case, riveted near the hinges, was weighed repeatedly until its leather straps creaked, confirming that the canister of false invasion plans would drag downward just enough to remain with the body. Naval intelligence officers compared barometric readings from the Atlantic pilot charts against the trembling handwriting of meteorologists who feared crosswinds would scatter parachuted rumors. Yet the reflection that swelled in those cramped rooms was quieter. Could a single, measured lie redirect the ferocity of coastal guns, persuading German commanders to point their binoculars elsewhere, without ever seeing the man who sparkled briefly beneath Andalusian sunlight? The question did not need answering aloud. The rustle of carbon copies provided the reply, suggesting that planning an invasion sometimes meant debating how long a corpse should steep in cold storage to smell convincingly of the sea. Reams of tissue paper sighed whenever officers flipped pages, releasing a starch scent that clung to cuffs. Nearby, a clerk traced currents across a chalk map, the powder coating his cuticles like frost. The wrists of the operation gently ticked like watch springs soaked in gin. When the submarine crew received their instructions, the steel corridor reeked of diesel and wet rope, and they listened to the captain recite coordinates with the softness reserved for lullabies. The corpse, swaddled in a canister packed with dry ice, felt heavier than any torpedo once frost bloomed across the metal. Sailors brushed frostbite from their knuckles, muttering about currents near Huelva, and one of them tucked a clove-scented rosary into his pocket for luck, not daring to let it touch the fabricated officer. As the vessel surfaced at night, moonlight pressed silver fingerprints across the hatch, and the men lifted the container toward the breathing sea, timing their movements with the swell so the deception would fall gracefully. Discovery demanded patience, suppression required the tide's complicity. Rediscovery would someday belong to archivists inhaling dust. One sailor noted how phosphorescent plankton streaked beside the hull, like ghostly handwriting blessing their mission. Another kept tasting iron on his tongue, convinced the sea already understood the story it was asked to tell. The sand remembers, instruments hum, and the hollow between waves waits for footsteps soft enough to listen. Dawn coloured the Andalusian surf in diluted copper when fishermen from Punta Umbria noticed the officer drifting like a loosened buoy, boots grazing eelgrass. They tasted salt on the wind as they hauled him ashore, believing for a heartbeat that some saint had delivered treasure because the attaché case clung stubbornly to his wrist. The local magistrate, Daniel Maldonado, arrived with papers that smelled of citrus oil stamped into their fibres, and he traced the Royal Marines insignia embossed on the wallet with reverent fingertips. Evidence was dutifully gathered, sand shaken from the pockets, sea lice catalogued, belt buckles recorded against lists used by the Guardia. Yet reflection settled over their work like linen. The man had died nobly, they thought, and the living should step quietly, mindful of the tide's secret. Suppression began, not through cruelty, but through protocol. Spanish officials locked the case in a cabinet scented with incense from the chapel next door, vowing to open it only in the presence of German observers. Children from the village pressed shells to their ears, claiming they could hear the officer's final orders in the surf. A stray dog circled the body, whining softly before curling beside the boots as though guarding a familiar sailor. In Seville, Abwehr officer Karl Erich Kuhlenthal received the coded message on a radio that crackled like frying oil, its vacuum tubes reddening the room. He dispatched envoys to collect the documents, instructing them to wear gloves powdered with talc so the pages would not absorb new fingerprints. The attaché case arrived creased and damp, and German analysts unfurled the blueprints beneath magnifying lamps, whose hot halos made the ink release a faint vinegar tang. They recorded each coordinate and penciled them into charts, reassured by the carefully staged receipts for theatre tickets that proved the British officer's cosmopolitan tastes. Reflective doubt surfaced briefly. Could any plan so conveniently discovered be genuine? But silence held because promotion beckoned, and because Berlin demanded certainty over skepticism. Thus, the deception spread across briefing rooms like pipe smoke, staining uniforms and dispatches alike. Outside, trams clanged past, their sparks outlining the office windows in brief magnesium bursts. Inside, typewriters chattered with insect persistence, turning salt-stiff paper into apparent destiny. Back in London, Colonel Johnny Bevan listened to intercepted German chatter through headphones cushioned with cracked leather, the static fizzing against his ears while clerks tapped Morse behind him. Each fragment of confirmation tasted like copper on his tongue. Troop movements shifting towards Sardinia, armoured divisions dispatched to Greece, the Wehrmacht entrusting coastal artillery to the wrong cliffs. Factual ledgers grew heavier, filled with penciled ticks noting which commanders deferred to the corps's story. Reflective awe occasionally slowed Bevan's pen as he watched candles gutter in the blackout, realizing that an unremarkable man from the streets, now reimagined as Major Martin, had become the hinge of an invasion fleet. Suppression persisted through necessary secrecy. Even families of naval officers were told nothing, and the damp morgue files were locked away, perfumed only by mildew. The central motif measurement guiding myth held steady, like a metronome beating beneath the Thames. Somewhere in the corridor, a kettle clicked, releasing steam that mingled with pipe smoke to create a homely veil over lethal logistics. Even the office cat, brushing against chair legs, seemed to sense the hush that guarded the corpse's borrowed heartbeat. Spanish pathologist Eduardo del Torno, who had first examined the body, revisited his notes under lamplight that buzzed with sleepy moths. He touched the embossed seal of his report, feeling granules of wax cling to his fingertips, and pondered the incongruities, the lungs waterlogged just enough, the liver suggesting poison rather than drowning. He wrote a second memorandum, its paper smelling faintly of iodine, but he filed it under a drawer reserved for unsent letters because diplomatic pressure requested silence. Discovery had occurred on the beach. Suppression now resided in this drawer, where scientific curiosity was muffled by neutrality. Reflective whispers rustled in his thoughts. Did the truth belong to medicine or to war? His question dissolved into the night sounds of Cadiz, leaving only the murmur of distant gulls. He dabbed coffee onto the edge of the report so it would resemble any other late-night docket. Outside his window, lantern light bled across cobblestones slick from the tide, sealing his resolve to let the mystery sleep. Centuries later in tone, though only years in fact, The British Admiralty sealed the mincemeat files in boxes lined with waxed canvas, each labelled with stenciled numbers that smelled of turpentine. The physical evidence, tweed uniforms, the photograph of the fictitious fiancée Pam, ticket stubs from the London theatres rested inside tissue paper that crackled like dry leaves. Archivists monitored humidity with mercury thermometers, ensuring the myth remained preserved. Reflection hovered over their nightly rounds. The corpse's journey reminded them that wars often hinge on the fragile dignity granted to the nameless. Silence continued out of reverence. Those who had stitched the identity refused interviews, claiming their throats still held the chill of the morgue. The motif of meticulous measurement persisted, now transmuted into the strict catalogue numbers guarding the story. Occasionally, a distant foghorn moaned along the Thames, threading the darkness with reminders of the sea's complicity. The archivist's footsteps, muffled by felt slippers, became another layer of protection around the sleeping narrative. In that era's newspapers, the public devoured sanitized accounts of D-Day that highlighted generals and storms, never suspecting the quiet cadaver whose briefcase had misled German binoculars. Reporters smelled fresh ink rolling off rotary presses, yet their questions bounced off official stonewalling, and the myth of pure battlefield courage flourished. Behind the scenes, signal officers compared intercepted weather logs with reconnaissance photographs, proving that the enemy's armoured reserves remained misplaced because of Major Martin's staged itinerary. Reflection seeped between the lines. How many lives on the Normandy sand were spared because one man's tragedy had been measured down to the weight of sardine tins in his pockets? Silence held out of gratitude more than secrecy, as if acknowledging the ruse would unspool its magic. Copyboys stacked bundles beside rooftop pigeon co-ops, watching feathers drift through the smoke-filled night. Editors marked proofs with pencils that smelled of cedar, all the while guarding the secret beneath their cuffs. The fog folds, type bars rest, and a patient breath waits between tides for footsteps soft enough to listen. In the fishing households along Huelva's salt-streaked alleys, the story endured differently, carried by the smell of frying sardines and the scrape of whetstones on hooks. Grandmothers recalled how priests blessed the unidentified officer before burial, sprinkling holy water that mingled with iodine, insisting that no rumour should disturb a soul that had drifted so far. Evidence of the deception was absent from their retellings. Instead, they treasured the sensory memory of heavy boots leaving grooves in church tiles. Reflection in these kitchens asked whether compassion requires ignorance, and the answer came through steaming pots. Sometimes kindness meant refusing to probe the official explanation. Their silence was born from reverence, wrapped in the smoke that curled above clay stoves. And the legend softened into a bedtime tale of a visitor the sea decided to keep. Children traced ship shapes into spilled flour, pretending to escort the officer back to sea. The night air smelled of orange blossom and charcoal, layering the memory with sweetness. Within German high command, memos scented with pipe tobacco circulated, analysing why the reserve divisions had been shifted south just days before the invasion fleet emerged. One report emphasised the authentic-looking theatre ticket dated for a London show still months ahead, noting the ink's slight smudge as proof it had ridden in a real pocket. Strategists felt the grain of the map paper under their palms, tracing the feints toward Greece they now realised were ghosts. Reflection tinged with regret flickered when officers imagined the corpse's last voyage. Had scepticism been dulled by the comforting smell of genuine leather and the weight of personal letters tied with ribbon? Suppression now took the form of embarrassment, leading to files stamped with red warnings that forbade discussion. Telephones rang with clipped urgency, yet no one mentioned how the evidence had seduced them. At night, guards polished doorknobs until they gleamed, as if shining away the memory. As decades passed, amateur historians combed declassified snippets, their fingers stained with microfilm chemicals, chasing the motif of measured deception. In musty libraries, they listened to projectors clicking like distant cicadas, while frames of naval memoranda flickered across screens, Evidence emerged in fragments: shipping manifests showing dry ice orders, bank ledgers recording stipends for false identities. Reflection accompanied every find, suggesting that the true heroism lay in the patience to craft a narrative so believable that even skeptics felt its texture as real. Still, certain testimonies remained censored, not by decree but by old habit. Surviving officers pursed their lips and cited security, as though the draft of cold morgue air still clung to their lungs. Discovery, therefore, became cyclical. Each revelation brushed against an older silence. Researchers warmed their hands around vending machine cocoa, the sweetness grounding them amid the dust. Outside, rain fretted against the windows, echoing the steady beat of archival persistence. In a shuttered brick chapel near Aberbargode, volunteers polished memorial plaques while discussing whispers that the unknown operative had once slept on local park benches. The wooden pews smelled of beeswax, and the stained glass threw pools of blue light across prayer books. Evidence was scarce. A registrar's marginalia hinting at a man named Glinda, a coroner's notation about rat poison, a faded receipt from a soup kitchen. Reflection softened those scraps into empathy, proposing that the dignity granted in death might have been absent in life, yet now rippled across coastlines. Silence here was motivated by respect for the dead poor. No one wanted to turn poverty into spectacle. The motif of measurement returned as the villagers debated how to weigh a soul that had been anonymous until the tides carried him into legend. Choir rehearsals filled the nave with breathy harmonies that vibrated through the flagstones. Outside, coal dust settled on window ledges, a gritty reminder of the hardship he once knew. Inside MI5's grey archives, humidity controllers clicked on and off like distant crickets, keeping the papers supple. Analysts reviewed operational diaries with gloved hands that smelled of latex, noting every calibration, how long the body soaked in saline, how the notes were folded to show believable thumb creases, how the fiancé's photo was deliberately creased near the eye to suggest it had been kissed. Each detail was evidence of obsessive craftsmanship. Reflection curled around the analysts like steam from afternoon tea, hinting that secrecy can be a gentler art, one that shields the fragile pride of nations through tender fabrication. Silence persisted not only out of duty, but because these archivists treasured the intimacy of knowing a story others still considered rumour. The corpse's borrowed identity remained a compass for them, pointing toward the idea that truth can be engineered without cruelty. Filing carts squeaked softly along linoleum, their wheels cushioned to avoid disturbing the sleeping testimonies. Even the smell of pencil shavings felt reverent in that hush. On the beaches of Normandy, veterans decades later recounted the invasion to their grandchildren, letting fistfuls of sand sift through their palms while gulls wheeled overhead. They described how the German artillery fired late, how minefields seemed strangely thin in places, and the grandchildren could taste salt in the breeze as they listened. Some veterans had heard whispers about a body deceiving the enemy, but their focus remained tactile. The grit inside their boots, the metallic tang of adrenaline near their tongues. Reflection brushed against their stories, suggesting that survival sometimes hinges on strangers never met. Their silence about operational secrets came from habit orders once given tend to lodge in the throat. The tide inhaled the children's laughter just as it once swallowed orders shouted above surf. Helmets now resting in museums still held grains of sand that whispered of the deception's success. The tide inhales, gulls glide, and breaths align with distant engines that no longer approach. When the story finally seeped into popular culture through novels and films, sound stages filled with the smell of sawdust and glue as set designers recreated submarine bunks. Actors buttoned scratchy uniforms, feeling how the wool itched against their wrists, and prop masters weighed briefcases with lead shot to ensure they thudded convincingly. Evidence translated into art, and audiences watched the luminous screens, hearing orchestras swell as the corpse drifted ashore again and again. Reflection hovered in theatre balconies, Did dramatization honor the quiet measurement of reality, or did it gild it until the edges blurred? Silence shifted motivation yet again. Consultants who knew the classified details withheld certain corrections, afraid the allure would vanish if every seam were exposed. Thus, the myth glimmered anew, anchored in sensory fidelity even as facts shimmered. Popcorn steam mingled with the resin scent of stage paint, creating a dreamlike fog. Projectors rattled like distant surf, reminding viewers of the night sea that birthed the tale. In Spanish naval archives, clerks eventually reopened cabinets whose hinges screeched like gulls, revealing logbooks perfumed with dry lavender sachets left to deter insects. The records detailed how the attaché case had been opened under diplomatic supervision, how the documents were dried over a brazier to prevent the ink from running, how German agents traced their fingers across the watermark to confirm authenticity. Each entry was evidence of meticulous bureaucracy. Reflection broadened as modern researchers, breathing in dust motes lit by slanting afternoon light, realized that neutrality itself can become an accomplice when paperwork is precise yet motives are opaque. Silence here stemmed from political caution. The legacy of staying out of the fray meant owning up to complicity only in whispers. Still, the rediscovered files hummed softly, echoing the original measurement that guided the deception. Researchers copied passages with fountain pens, the ink pooling like miniature tides. Outside, church bells tolled, their bronze voices folding into the archival hush. The motif of calibrated myth reappeared when codebreakers compared their intercepts to the timeline of the body's discovery, listening to the clatter of bomb machines that once filled Bletchley huts with ozone-scented heat. They plotted graphs showing the lag between German redeployments and Allied landings, fingers smudged with pencil lead. Evidence from decrypted messages proved that the Wehrmacht clung to the falsehood long enough to dilute its defences. Reflection accompanied these calculations. Perhaps war is less about force than about persuading your opponent to measure reality incorrectly. Silence in the code-breaking community lingered out of tradition. Veterans of secrecy prefer the company of files to interviews. Thus, the corpse's story entwined with humming rotors and the sweet metallic scent of soldered circuits. Teacups rattled on saucers whenever the machines hit a resonant frequency, yet conversations remained whispers. Even the gardens outside the huts seemed to bend inward, hedges muffling the world beyond the wires. In quiet London flats, women who had typed the forged love letters kept shoeboxes of carbon copies tied with ribbon that smelled faintly of perfume. Evidence lived in their cursive loops, the way they imitated a playful fiancé, adding smudges where a tear might have fallen. Each night they had written by lamplight, fingertips stained blue, hoping the intimacy they invented would withstand forensic scrutiny. Reflection arrived decades later as they reread those letters, realizing they had composed a life that someone finally believed. Silence persisted because revealing their role felt immodest, as if they might disturb the tender illusion they had spun. Their craft showed how measurement could be emotional, calibrating phrases to echo the heartbeat of an imagined officer. They remembered tapping the pages lightly to dry the ink, hearing only the clock and the distant rumble of buses. Lavender sachets hidden in drawers kept the memories soft. The codename, Mincemeat, rustled through corridors like a joke shared over chipped enamel mugs, yet the execution smelled of oil, ink, and seawater rather than levity. Operational diaries recorded barge schedules, dry ice deliveries, and the precise duration the body spent in a vacuum-sealed container to retard decay. Evidence was logged with tick marks, each representing a guard posted, a telegram destroyed, a tailor adjusting the uniform's inseam to match naval regulations. Reflection seeped in. As planners considered how empathy could coexist with manipulation, they toasted the unnamed man with quiet sips of whiskey, honouring him even as they transformed him into bait. Silence, in this phase, was enforced by legal directives, and by the soft loyalty of those who believed the ruse protected thousands who would soon storm Europe's beaches. Coal fires in the grates crackled, mixing warmth with the chill of clandestine intent. Even the smell of pipe tobacco seemed ceremonial, curling like incense around the plan. After the war, the grave in Huelva received visitors who traced the carved name Major William Martin with sand-dusted fingertips while cypress trees whispered overhead. They left flowers that smelled of sun, warmed earth, unaware that beneath the inscription lay Glindar's bones joined to an alias. Evidence of the misdirection remained hidden, but the stone itself became part of the narrative, its weathered letters catching moonlight like a lantern. Reflection deepened among those mourners. They felt that honouring the false name still honoured the man, because stories can grant the dignity reality withheld. Silence there came from awe. Voices naturally softened among marble and waves. Visitors often poured a splash of sherry into the soil, a libation blending sweetness with salt spray. Occasionally, a violinist played near the gate, the notes drifting like gulls into the dusk. The dune exhales, candles flicker, and distant boys blink in rhythm with closing eyes tonight. One of the most delicate artifacts remained, the photograph of Pam, actually an actress named Jean, whose image was clipped from a wallet and scented lightly with rosewater to mimic having been nestled near perfume. Conservators later noted the slight abrasion along the corner where sailors had practiced sliding it from the pocket with gloved fingers. Evidence of authenticity hinged on such textures, the chalk dust that settled on her smile after being tucked into a lifebelt, the way humid air curled the paper just enough to appear cherished. Reflection on her unwitting contribution raised tender questions about consent and memory, although answers were left unspoken out of respect for the woman who never knew she became a talisman. Silence, here, was motivated by modesty, ensuring her everyday life remained untouched by the mythology surrounding the corpse. The photo now rests on felt, lit by gentle LEDs that mimic morning sun. Visitors leaning in sometimes detect the faint residue of rose, as if the fiction still breathes. The Official Secrets Act loomed like a foghorn in the minds of participants, its legal timbre resonating through decades. Clerks stored transcripts inside steel cabinets smelling of machine oil, and they logged each access on cards that rasped beneath their pens. Evidence of compliance was as tangible as the rubber stamps thudding against paper, ensuring no stray detail escaped. Reflection crept in during night shifts when the corridors fell silent. Except for the distant rumble of trains, they wondered if history would ever understand the delicate arithmetic of lies that saved lives that saved lives. Their silence was not fearful so much as disciplined, a rhythm they had practiced until it felt as natural as breathing. Thus the myth remained cocooned, protected by routine. Occasionally, a janitor polishing brass door plates would see their tired eyes and offer tea, never asking why they stayed so late. Even the flicker of fluorescent bulbs seemed to pulse in classified Morse. Eventually, historian Charles Fraser petitioned to view the sealed files, submitting forms that smelled of fresh toner and waiting in corridors where radiators hissed. When the boxes were unsnapped, the air released a mix of old leather, brine, and faded gum adhesive. Evidence spilled forth, telegram drafts, coroner's notes, the memorandum instructing diplomats on how to feign indignation if Spain protested. Reflection washed over Fraser as he realised the breadth of collaboration necessary to cradle the deception, from tailors to telegraph clerks. Silence broke reluctantly, replaced by careful narration. He understood that telling the story required preserving its tenderness, not just its intrigue. Discovery thus became an act of stewardship, returning the corpse's journey to public memory without stripping it of mystery. He copied passages in pencil so the graphite could be erased if needed, respecting the document's fragility. Outside, autumn leaves rattled across the pavement, sounding like the shuffle of unseen watchmen. In classrooms, Teachers dimmed the lights and projected grainy photos of the supposed Major Martin, letting the hum of fluorescent tubes mix with the shuffle of notebooks. Evidence was woven into their lectures through maps smeared with chalk dust, arrows showing how German divisions marched away from Normandy. Reflection guided their final words of each lesson, reminding students that empathy can be engineered when truth refuses to cooperate. Silence entered when the bell rang. Teenagers carried the story quietly, perhaps whispering later while tracing condensation on bus windows. The corpse's secret became a lullaby of strategy, teaching that the texture of paper and the scent of seawater can weigh as heavily as artillery. Teachers sometimes played recordings of surf to lull restless classes, blending ambience with analysis. When the lights flicked back on, the chalk-dusted air looked like distant spray. Only once did official films whisper the precise year, 1943, when the corpse slipped into Spanish waters, and even then the number was spoken softly, as though pronouncing it too loudly might disturb the alignment of fate. Evidence from that period glowed within logbooks noting moon phases, tide tables, and the timing of a feigned radio chatter to corroborate the documents. Reflection lingered on how a single calendar year can cradle both despair and salvation, holding the moment when a nameless man received a promotion into myth. Silence quickly followed the uttered date. Narrators changed the subject to the rustle of dispatch riders and the scent of diesel on the docks. Measurement had met legend, and the balance felt too delicate to mention numbers again. Projectionists paused the reels afterward, letting the whir fade into stillness. Viewers exhaled in sync, as if the year itself were a spell that must dissipate quietly. Artists have since sketched the body's final float through charcoal lines that smudge under fingertips, blending sea and sky into a single soot-soft horizon. They layer evidence through textures, wax resist for the foam, graphite for the leather shoes, white chalk for the gulls hovering above. Viewers lean close, smelling paper warmed by studio lamps, and feel the narrative seep through shading. Reflection arises as they consider how art can cradle deception without judgment, honouring the quiet physics of buoyancy and secrecy alike. Silence here is contemplative, galleries invite whispers, preserving the dreamlike spell. Some artists add salt crystals to their pigments so surfaces glitter faintly like wet uniforms. Others soundtrack their exhibitions with distant heartbeats, reminding patrons of the life once carried by those waves. Lanterns dim, graphite settles, and hush drifts with the imagined tide across attentive lungs tonight. Meanwhile, forensic scientists revisited the autopsy records, running gloved fingers over brittle sheets that still smelled faintly of carbolic. They used modern spectrometry to analyze residue on the clothing, detecting traces of phosphorus from the flares used during the drop, thereby confirming the body's exposure matched the official report. Reflection guided their interpretations, suggesting that empathy can coexist with calibration. By understanding the body's final hours, they honored the individual beyond the mission. Silence was motivated by professionalism. Lab results were filed without fanfare, spoken only in measured tones during conferences. The motif of measurement thus evolved, overlaying new technology atop the original deception while retaining the same reverent hush. Refrigerated cabinets hummed nearby, keeping scraps of fabric pliable enough for study. Even the blue glow of monitors felt subdued, as if mourning the man they examined. Among the belongings of British diplomat Sir Bernard, a diary surfaced smelling of old leather and pipe smoke, its pages brittle yet legible. Evidence gleamed in his cramped handwriting, references to a Spaniard nicknamed the Giant Sardine, courier of whispers about the found documents, and notes on how embassy staff feigned outrage before discreetly thanking fate. Reflection seeped between his sentences as he marvelled at how deception tasted of olives, sherry, and the dusty sunlight of consular afternoons. He had kept this diary locked away, suppression driven by loyalty to comrades who might have faced censure if the jest were revealed. Rediscovery occurred when his granddaughter opened the desk, feeling the smooth brass key warm in her palm. Silence cracked, but gently, like a seashell revealing the echo of waves. She pressed dried petals between the pages to mark passages that shimmered with humanity. Outside, swallows stitched the twilight sky, stitching together past and present. German infantry stationed along the Greek coastline remembered the redeployment orders arriving with the smell of damp wool and wood smoke, compelling them to dig fortifications among rocky coves. Evidence of the deception lived in their diaries, sketches of driftwood, notes about ration shortages, assurances that an Allied armada would soon arrive where nothing ever did. Reflection decades later brought a bittersweet taste. Veterans wondered how their trust had been swayed by papers they never saw, only heard described through stern voices. Silence for them stemmed from fatigue. After the war, many chose to let the memory fade, unwilling to relive a strategy that had made them idle while distant cliffs erupted. Still, their recollections, when shared, added another layer to the corpse's journey. They remembered the hum of mosquitoes over foxholes and the metallic bite of condensed milk. Even the stars seemed to mock them, glittering over empty seas. Mathematicians attached to Allied planning modelled the probabilities of the ruse succeeding, scribbling on chalkboards until their cuticles were rimed with white dust. Evidence of their calculations remains in preserved notebooks that smell faintly of camphor, showing variables for drift time, current vectors, and the likelihood of axis interception. Reflection whispers through those formulas, hinting that even in war, elegance of numbers can sound like a lullaby. Their silence afterward was less about secrecy and more about humility. Underpin every measured lie that holds. The corpse's path, charted through integrals and saltwater densities, thus joined the chorus of quiet craftsmanship. Coffee rings stain the margins, humanizing the cold logic. Chalk crumbs gather along windowsills like miniature dunes, proof that abstraction once toiled beside the tide. In Ireland's coastal listening stations, operators heard the German radio bulletins referencing the supposed Allied strike toward Greece, the static hissing like seafoam across pebbles. Evidence accumulated in their logbooks, each entry describing frequencies, call signs, and voice timbres, all smelling of graphite and rain-soaked wool. Reflection accompanied their observations. Could a man who never breathed again truly redirect the breath of nations? The question hung above the receivers before dissolving into the steady thump of waves against cliffs. Silence reigned in those huts because secrecy orders mingled with the natural instinct to whisper when surrounded by fog. Measurement, once more, guided myth as antennas translated the echo of a corpse into strategic advantage. Kerosene heaters ticked and sighed, offering warmth to stiff fingers. The windows filmed with condensation, mirroring the blurred certainty outside. Years later, Glinda's relatives, few though they were, gathered in a modest kitchen where coal smoke clung to curtains and kettles whistled. They held a letter from the government acknowledging his role, the paper thick and creamy beneath their fingertips. Evidence came in the form of an official seal and a pension note, proof that the nameless vagabond had finally been recognized. Reflection swelled as they imagined his restless footsteps on city cobbles and the unlikely path that led him to shape history. Their silence afterward was born of tenderness. They spoke his name only in murmurs, fearful of fracturing the fragile dignity newly bestowed. Hearth glows warmed chipped mugs of tea, steeped until nearly black. Outside, rain threaded through alley gutters, echoing the river that once carried him beyond anonymity. Hearth glows, coals sigh, and memories float like embers along the rafters tonight above resting ears. Modern naval academies integrate the tale into ethics seminars, projecting slides while cadets sit in uniform rows, boots polished to mirror the fluorescent glare. Evidence is presented through facsimiles of the forged letters, the cadets passing them hand to hand, feeling the raised ink and noting the deliberate coffee stain near the margin. Reflection is encouraged. They discuss whether deception can be moral when it preserves thousands, their voices low enough to meld with the hum of ventilation. Silence follows each session, a contemplative pause before drills resume, suggesting that even in institutions built on command, there is room for whispered histories. The corpse's measured journey becomes a compass for debates about honour. Chalk dust floats in the shaft of light slicing the room, and someone coughs quietly, reminded of morgue chill. Later, on the parade ground, the clack of heels seems to echo the heartbeat of the tale. Oceanographers have also revisited the drift path, launching buoys scented with machine oil into similar currents to confirm the timing. Their data loggers clicked softly while waves slapped the hulls, recording temperature gradients and salinity that matched the original estimates. Evidence from these experiments showed the corpse would indeed arrive near Huelva within the planned window, vindicating the meticulous tide charts scribbled in pencil decades earlier. Reflection accompanied the scientists as they tasted salt spray on their lips, marveling at how physics embraced a covert story. Silence aboard their vessels came from concentration. Only gulls broke it, crying above the measuring instruments. Thus, natural rhythms once again verified the myth's foundation. Midnight watches found them sipping broth, warming hands over thermoses while buoys blinked like patient stars. Sonar pings rolled through the hull, a modern lullaby to the ancient ruse. In a museum exhibition titled Tides of Deception, visitors move through dim galleries where spotlights pool like moonbeams on relics. They inhale the mixed aromas of aged canvas, wax polish, and faint ozone from display cases. Evidence is everywhere. The replica attaché case with authentic rust, the logbook displaying carefully inked entries, the typewriter whose keys still carry smudges of navy blue ribbon. Reflection is prompted by whispered audio guides describing how compassion and calculation intertwined. Silence envelopes the room, not because of censorship, but because the design encourages hushed footsteps, letting the central motif resonate. The corpse's story becomes tactile again, reachable through glass yet still wrapped in mystery. A recorded heartbeat pulses softly beneath the floorboards, syncing with the visitors' breaths. On leaving, they pass through a corridor perfumed with sea salt, a final sensory benediction. Essayists have begun to reinterpret the operation through the lens of identity, writing in cafes where espresso perfumes the air and rain taps the windows. They cite correspondence between intelligence officers debating the ethics of forging a life, their laptops glowing pale blue. Evidence comes from newly released memos that describe the debates over which accent to assign the fictitious major, which bank account to fabricate, which medals to include on the uniform. Reflection drives their prose, suggesting that the ultimate respect was in crafting a believable, honourable life for someone who had little dignity while alive. Silence lingers in their drafts as they delete sensational phrases, striving for gentleness instead of bravado. Measurement here is linguistic, balancing fact and feeling. Sugar crystals crunch beneath spoons as they stir ideas into focus. The cafe's steamed windows mirror the blurred boundary between truth and design. The sand remembers, instruments hum, the hollow waits. When the files were more broadly released in 1996, the announcement arrived not with fanfare, but with a press bulletin that smelled of toner and envelope glue. Researchers queued beneath buzzing lights, waiting to handle the papers that had slept for generations. Evidence now sat openly on reading room desks, autopsy transcripts, naval intelligence memos, marginal doodles of anchors made by bored clerks. Reflection rippled across the scholars' faces as they realized the corpse's story had always balanced between compassion and manipulation. Silence persisted even in disclosure. Archivists asked for whispers to protect the fragile pages, and visitors obliged, breathing softly as though the man himself rested nearby. The motif endured, showing that time had only deepened the measured myth. Outside, pigeons cooed on stone ledges, oblivious to the secrets unfolding below. Inside, the smell of linen gloves and old glue conjured the morgue's chill once more. Poets, too, have wandered to the Huelva shoreline, letting the Atlantic mist bead on their notebooks while they listen to waves slap the seawall. They gather pebbles slick with algae, their fingers cool and gritty, as they jot lines about a messenger made of bone and salt. Evidence may be sparse for them, just the grave, the tide, the scent of pine from nearby groves. But inspiration thrives in such minimalism. Reflection swirls as they ponder whether the ocean ever resented being drafted into espionage. Their silence afterward stems from awe. The sea commands it. Some drop ink into the surf, watching the plume dissolve like whispered confidences. Others close their eyes to memorize the gull cries, storing the sound for winter recitations. Moonlight slides, gulls hush, and tide foam shivers in rhythm with closed eyes waiting through the small hours. Digital archivists now convert the documents into high-resolution scans, their workstations humming as gentle as bees. They calibrate color balances to capture the precise sepia of the forged identification cards, ensuring that the faint fingerprint smudge remains visible. Evidence thus becomes pixelated, yet the tactile story survives. Viewers can zoom into the fibers of the paper, almost smelling the historical ink through suggestion. Reflection occupies the archivists as they slide styluses across tablets, meditating on how technology can preserve the softness of a handwritten lie. Silence in the digitization lab is broken only by the soft whir of cooling fans, a modern lullaby accompanying the age-old motif of measured myth. Anti-static mats ground their steps, the faint rubber scent mixing with ozone. Occasionally, a scanner lamp flickers, casting brief auroras across the documents like tidal light. In classrooms of military psychologists, the corpse's tale becomes a case study in perception, delivered over the scent of dry erase markers and freshly brewed coffee. Evidence includes transcripts of German officers praising the discovered plans, demonstrating how confirmation bias can feel as tangible as rope in the hands. Reflection leads students to explore how stress and expectation can dull skepticism, inviting them to imagine the weight of authority pressing against their shoulders. Silence follows each discussion as cadets contemplate their own susceptibility to finely tuned hoaxes. The story functions as a mirror, polished with salt spray and ink. Notebooks close with soft thuds, like muffled doors. Outside, wind rattles flagpoles, underscoring how easily belief can be bent. Retired sailors who once guarded the submarine recount the mission in veterans' halls where wooden floors creak and the air smells of brass polish. Evidence seeps through their anecdotes, the way the canister rims scraped their knuckles, the hiss as dry ice met seawater, the signal lamp blinking once before the drop. Reflection often leaves them staring into mugs of tea, acknowledging that they carried both a corpse and the hopes of an entire armada. Their silence afterward is contemplative. Memories this weighty deserve pauses. The motif of careful measurement returns as they describe timing the release between waves, counting heartbeats in the dark. Metal ribbons fade on their jackets, yet their voices stay steady. A distant jukebox plays waltzes, its softness contrasting with the steel memories afloat in the room. Across podcasts and hush-toned radio shows, narrators speak of the operation with microphones inches from their lips, the room padded with foam that smells faintly of dust. Evidence is cited through declassified telegrams and the lingering photo of Major Martin smiling beside his staged sweetheart. Reflection takes on a lullaby cadence, inviting listeners to imagine the softness of sodden uniforms and the slick feel of kelp in a fisherman's net. Silence is built into the format. Pauses stretch long enough for the mind to drift, reinforcing the ASMR-like spell. Measurement exists even here, in the pacing of syllables designed to match the gentle deception they describe. Listeners hear the faint inhale of the host, syncing their breathing to the story. Recording lights glow red, tinting the studio like a midnight wardroom. In philosophical circles, the tale inspires debates over the ethics of instrumentalizing the dead, discussed in libraries where dust and leather mingle on the tongue. Evidence is drawn from legal opinions and wartime correspondence, each page rustling like distant rain. Reflection forces participants to weigh respect against necessity, to consider whether granting posthumous heroism compensates for prior neglect. Silence eventually settles as they close the books, understanding that some judgments remain suspended like buoy lines in calm water. The corpse's journey refuses easy verdicts, continuing to balance compassion and calculation. Chalk notes on the blackboard fade overnight, as if even words recoil from permanence. Tea poured into porcelain cups clicks gently, punctuating the unresolved. Travel writers who visit Uelva describe twilight walks along the estuary, shoes crunching on shells while lanterns flicker along the promenade. They note the smell of orange blossoms drifting from courtyards and the taste of salted almonds handed out by vendors. Evidence of the past appears subtly. Plaques, guided whispers, the grave's fresh flowers. Reflection enters their prose as they compare the gentle town to the turbulent history it once cradled. Silence arises from respect for locals who still lower their voices near the cemetery. They pocket smooth stones, later placing them on hotel desks as tactile reminders. Camera shutters click softly, careful not to fracture the dusk. Shadows lengthen, bells soften, and footsteps slow beneath the sky turning silver grey. Tonight as sea hushes. Academic panels now revisit the case with interdisciplinary voices, oceanographers beside linguists, ethicists beside costume conservators. The conference halls smell of polished wood and projector bulbs warming the air. Evidence circulates through slides of tide simulations, scans of love letters, inventories of the personal effects pinned to the body. Reflection blooms as each scholar realizes the narrative's completeness depends on their collective senses. Touch, sight, sound, even taste when describing salt in the air. Silence follows exuberant debates, a mutual breath acknowledging that some mysteries feel healthier when partially veiled. The motif of measurement entwined with myth remains the guiding star across all their disciplines. Laptops click shut in unison, echoing the lid of the attaché case. Outside, fountain spray drifts in the wind, sounding like distant surf applause. So we arrive again at that caliper, frozen at 17.8 centimeters, its brass teeth cool beneath museum glass, the scent of polished oak lingering in the quiet hall. Evidence still rests within reach. Letters, receipts, the coroner's looping script. But it refuses to exhaust the story. Reflection suggests that every measured detail, from the weight of a sardine tin to the curl of a photograph, continues to ripple outward, guiding how we honor the anonymous and how we wield imagination as a tool. Silence envelops the display, not because answers are forbidden, but because the listener within each of us senses the reverence owed to a man who traveled farther in death than in life. Perhaps the true deception endures in our heartbeat's response to these artifacts, wondering whether the sea itself conspired to grant him purpose. The glass case hums softly with climate controls, the air tasting faintly of metal, and the mystery remains content to rest, half explained, beneath the lull of waves we can almost hear. The gallery hush deepens as evening guards dim the sconces, and the caliper's muted gleam becomes a beacon for fresh curiosities. Nearby, a velvet-lined drawer slides open to reveal another relic, the wax-sealed envelope that once travelled tucked against the corpse's chest, its seal impressed with a signet now dulled by salt. Conservators describe how, when the wax warmed under their lamps, it exhaled a faint honey scent, reviving the moment it had been stamped in a Whitehall office, scented with pipe smoke and damp wool. Scholars lean close, tracing the ridges with gloved fingertips, and evidence unfurls in murmurs about who handled it, who trusted it, who misread it. Reflection pulses like a tide pool in moonlight. A single fold, a single scent, could sway a continent. Silence stretches companionably between visitors as they imagine the envelope slipping beneath waves, the ink steadying its heartbeat long enough to fool the enemy. Across the Atlantic, in a Naval Academy's wainscoted lecture hall, instructors stage a midnight seminar illuminated only by green-shaded desk lamps. Cadets cradle mugs of cocoa laced with nutmeg while studying enlarged photographs projected onto linen screens, the corpuscles of film grain sparkling like seawater. Evidence arrives through the scratch of chalk, marking out the chain of custody from morgue to submarine to Spanish shore. Reflection enters when a professor unwraps a reproduction of the wallet, letting its leather perfume the air with tannins, and reminds the class that entire flotillas found safe passage because someone measured the wallet's bulge to the gram. Silence follows as cadets imagine themselves balancing deception with duty, their bootsteps muffled out of instinctive respect. Outside, frost halos the parade ground lamps, echoing the dry ice bloom that once veiled the canister. In a Parisian atelier, costume historians examine the naval uniform worn by the false major, its fabric now laid flat atop unbleached muslin. The room smells of steam irons and cedar blocks, and evidence hides in stitches, hastily shortened sleeves, collar mends where salt stiffened the wool, faint residues of malt preservative along the cuffs. Reflection shimmers as the historians debate how tactile authenticity swayed German eyes. They note the brass buttons polished with vinegar until they caught even the weakest Andalusian sun. Silence accompanies their work because needles clicking through fabric feel like a séance with artisans long gone. They chart the uniform's travels on craft paper, whispering the names of tailors and quartermasters who bent over this same cloth while blackout sirens moaned. Outside the atelier, rain drums on zinc rooftops, a soft metronome for their gentle stitching. Centuries later, insensibility, though separated by only a few global shifts, a virtual reality lab reconstructs the journey for visitors who don headsets in a room perfumed with fresh circuitry and felt. Evidence is data, meticulously scanned artifacts, sonar maps, atmospheric recordings of Andalusian surf at dawn. Reflection arises as audiences float through a simulation of the drop, hearing the submarine hull creak, feeling controllers pulse in rhythms mimicking waves. Silence descends when the scene lingers on the body drifting, phosphorescence tracing his outline like bioluminescent penmanship. The motif of careful measurement persists even in code. The programmers calibrated moonlight intensity to match declassified meteorological logs. When the headsets lift, viewers blink against ordinary fluorescent glare, the afterimage of silvered surf still soft inside their ears. In Madrid's diplomatic archives, a climate-controlled vault exudes the mineral odour of stone and ink as newly catalogued letters reveal Spain's delicate tightrope walk. Evidence appears in the tidy copperplate of couriers who describe the attaché case's arrival, noting how candle soot smudged the leather during the first inspection. Reflection curls through marginal comments. One clerk muses about the moral gravity of opening the belongings of the dead, even when neutrality demanded compliance. Silence permeates the reading room. Only the slow turn of parchment and the sigh of air vents accompany the scholars. They discover a packet of dried rosemary pinned inside a folder, perhaps left by a secretary seeking to mask the odour of damp paper. That herb still releases a ghost of pine, linking the documents to the chapel incense that once watched over the corpse. On a Scottish isle battered by constant spray, marine biologists lead a field study tracing the currents that ferried the body. They deploy drift nets from a wooden pier slick with kelp, and the air tastes of salt and peat smoke from both is inland. Evidence emerges as GPS buoys blink crimson against slate waves, proving that eddies near the Strait of Gibraltar spin like slow clocks, reliable enough for spymasters to trust. Reflection is voiced around a peat fire later, when the team compares their graphs to faded naval charts annotated in pencil. Silence settles between sips of smoky whiskey, honouring those earlier observers who listened to the sea without satellites. Boots steam beside the hearth, and the crackle of burning peat resembles distant radio static, as if the ocean still shares dispatches from that clandestine night. In Berlin's museums, curators quietly assemble an exhibition confronting intelligence errors. Among the exhibits is a German staff officer's blotter stained with violet ink and burnt tobacco, its blotches forming accidental constellations. Evidence etched into the blotter reveals repeated references to the corpse's documents, each notation pressed by a nib harder than the last, as though urgency deepened belief. Reflection is staged through interactive displays, asking visitors to weigh skepticism against hierarchy. A gloved hand lifts a reproduction of the forged theatre tickets, and the hushed audio track explains how the paper stock precisely matched London's West End, convincing wary analysts. Silence blankets the room where the blotter rests. Visitors read the officer's later memo, edges singed from post-war destruction attempts, and sensed the heavy pause of regret. Beyond the gallery, the city's trams hum, mimicking the clamouring typewriters that once relayed orders born of misdirection. Meanwhile, in a Welsh community hall adorned with miners' banners, storytellers gather families for an evening vigil dedicated to Glinda's memory. The hall smells of leek soup and coal dust, and evidence lives in oral tradition. A grandmother recounts the slight limp he carried from rail yard mishaps. Another recalls how he whistled hymns while queuing at soup kitchens. Reflection saturates the room when a local choir sings an old lullaby, their harmony soft as coal ash, reimagining the man's wanderings as a pilgrimage no one noticed. Silence follows each verse, punctuated only by the creak of pine pews and the rustle of wool shawls. On a side table, a tin of ration biscuits sits beside a candle, not as prop, but as offering. The flame flickers whenever the door opens, echoing the morgue's draft that once brushed his borrowed uniform. Deep within London's underground tunnels, a heritage tour guides visitors past decommissioned communications rooms where the air still tastes of dust and iron. Evidence survives in the graffiti scratched by signallers waiting on benches, including tiny anchors and initials that correspond to the roster of mincemeat's planners. Reflection emerges when the guide dims the lights, letting only a single emergency bulb glow the colour of honey, and plays a restored recording of Morse messages confirming the Germans' misallocation of forces. Silence spreads as listeners imagine the headphones' weight, the cordite tang from nearby anti-aircraft emplacements, the balancing act between celebration and secrecy. The tunnels amplify every inhalation. Even the shuffle of shoes resembles the submarine's weighted footsteps. Above them, London traffic thrums, oblivious to the subdued history resonating below. In Rome's ecclesiastical libraries, theologians examine letters exchanged between chaplains who struggled with the morality of using a corpse as a weapon. The parchment smells of frankincense absorbed over decades, and evidence is tender. A notation about baptizing an alias, a mention of prayers whispered for a soul whose name the clergy were forbidden to reveal. Reflection glows in their ink, debating whether sanctification can be extended to a fabrication if it saves the living. Silence reigns in the reading chamber, broken only by the swish of cassocks and the delicate chime of a water clock marking the hours. Outside, swallows carve the dusk above tiled rooftops, their cries lacing with distant bells. The motif of measurement here is spiritual. a weighing of grace against necessity. Across the Pacific in a coastal city's aquarium, educators adapt the story for younger audiences by focusing on tides and trust. The air smells of brine and algae as children press their palms to glass tanks, where moon jellies pulse like slow heartbeats. Evidence is translated into tactile stations, a mock-attaché case weighed with sandbags, a tide table puzzle with pieces shaped like currents, a recording of gulls from Huelva. Reflection is coaxed when educators dim the room and invite the children to imagine how the ocean carries secrets. Silence gently follows as they listen to the murmur of pumps and the distant echo of a foghorn piped through speakers. Measurement mingles with wonder. The kids learn to read the tide clock while resting their foreheads against cool glass. The corpse's tale drifts subtly into their dreams, anchored by sensory cues instead of battlefield diagrams. In a Manhattan radio archive lined with Bakelite consoles, engineers digitize wartime broadcasts acknowledging the invasion. The space smells faintly of hot vacuum tubes and varnished wood, and evidence reveals itself in scratchy recordings where anchors describe the Allied breakthrough without hinting at the corpse who eased the way. Reflection emerges as the engineers notice the tremor in a broadcaster's voice, perhaps aware of rumors yet sworn to secrecy. Silence fills the control room. When they replay the moment German defenses faltered, they imagine how listeners clenched hands around porcelain teacups or rationed cigarettes, unaware of the cadaver drifting behind the headlines. The motif of careful calibration returns as the engineers adjust equalizers, balancing hiss and speech, the way planners once balanced salt and ink. In a seaside hospice overlooking Sussex chalk cliffs, aging intelligence veterans share final memories under blankets smelling of lavender detergent. Evidence surfaces in their murmured recollections: the cold bite of the morgue table when they first saw Glinda, the weight of the attaché case as they tested the cuff chain, the spoonful of stew they barely tasted before night maneuvers resumed. Reflection saturates the room when a volunteer plays a gramophone tune popular in wartime dance halls, and the veterans recall coaxing laughter from colleagues who stitched false love letters. Silence follows as they gaze through panoramic windows where gulls drift on thermals. One taps the armrest in rhythm with imagined Morse. Another fingers the edge of a hospital tray as if flipping a dossier. Their breaths synchronize with the gentle whoosh of oxygen machines, echoing the submarine's steady valves. Beyond Earth, a communications array crewed by astronomers uses the operation as metaphor during long night shifts. Hunched over consoles in a dome smelling of cold metal and brewed tea, they compare deep space signal analysis to the deciphering of German dispatches. Evidence lies in their logs, where they note the time delay between signal transmission and reception, just as intelligence officers once measured the lag before enemy redeployments. Reflection surfaces when they discuss how belief colors interpretation. If a corpse could sway armies, a misread pulse of radio noise might spark cosmic myths. Silence is essential to their work. Even whispers feel loud beneath the rotating dome. The motif of measurement extends to the stars, where deception and discovery both rely on patient listening. A culinary historian in Lisbon recreates the meals described in Major Martin's forged receipts, steaming clams in white wine while radio static from archived broadcasts crackles softly. The kitchen smells of garlic, citrus, and wood smoke. Evidence becomes edible. The precise portion of almonds noted in an expense ledger, the drizzle of sherry mirroring a bar tab in the officer's wallet. Reflection occurs as diners taste the dishes in a candlelit tavern, realizing that even gastronomy played a role in solidifying the disguise. Silence follows each bite, not from secrecy, but from reverence for the unseen man whose life was invented down to the texture of his supper. Silverware clinks gently, like distant anchor chains, and the candle flames flicker in rhythm with imagined ship lanterns. The motif persists: calories, cents, and receipts measured to fool the enemy. In Buenos Aires, tango musicians compose a suite titled Mincemeat Milonga, rehearsing in a studio scented with rosin and polished mahogany. Evidence is woven into melody. The bandoneon imitates the swell of the sea. The violin traces the trajectory from London fog to Andalusian sunrise. Reflection surfaces in lyrics whispered between verses, honoring the unnamed traveller whose story dances between continents. Silence is cultivated after each run-through, allowing the final chord to shimmer like moonlight on a conning tower. Dancers practice slow okos, their shoes scuffing the floor softly, echoing the corpse's final turn in the tide. Measurement here is rhythmic, ensuring each syncopation aligns with the narrative's heartbeat. On a Caribbean island once home to Allied listening posts, a small museum perched above turquoise water curates a shell collection stamped with catalogue numbers. Evidence hides in a conch etched with coordinates referencing the drop zone. A radio operator had carved them during a lull, letting the shell's blush pink interior preserve the memory. Reflection glows as visitors hold the shell to their ears, hearing not just surf but the faint hum of imagined radio chatter. Silence envelops the museum veranda, where trade winds toss white curtains. The only sound is palm fronds clacking like semaphore flags. Measurement surfaces in the placard, detailing wind patterns that ferried German transmissions across the Atlantic, aligning natural rhythms with espionage. A novelist in Reykjavik drafts by candlelight while snow rattles the window panes, weaving the operation into a saga style. The room smells of beeswax and coffee, and evidence threads through her manuscript, descriptions of the corpse wrapped like a northbound drifter, the submarine likened to a whale guiding fate. Reflection hums beneath each sentence as she parallels Viking funerary rites with modern theatrics, suggesting that shipborne deceits echo across eras. Silence underscores her process. She writes with wool socks muffling footsteps, every keystroke a whisper. Measurement appears in her meticulous scene planning, aligning tides with aurora displays she has only seen in winter skies. The corpse's tail adopts northern hues yet retains its core of gentle precision. In an open-air market in Seville, spice merchants offer blends named after wartime legends. One stall sells Pam's Perfume Pepper, a mix of rose hips and black peppercorns inspired by the fiancé's photo. Evidence of the story's cultural seep lies in the vendor's patter. He recounts how the aromatic mix mirrors the scent discovered on the photograph's corner. Reflection stirs customers who inhale the sachet, tasting the bittersweet blend on their tongues. Silence momentarily blankets the bustling market as buyers imagine the photo tucked near a heart that never beat again. The motif of measurement enters through the vendor's brass scale, its pans polished bright, weighing spices just as intelligence officers weighed the briefcase to match a naval officer's stride. In Copenhagen's design school, students reinterpret the attaché case as an object lesson in user experience. The atelier smells of linseed oil and 3D printer resin while prototypes line a table. Evidence informs their sketches, diagrams showing how the case was secured to the wrist, notes about leather grain chosen to signal high rank without ostentation. Reflection accompanies critiques as professors ask whether empathy extends to ergonomics for someone who would never feel the handle's pressure. Silence settles when a prototype clicks shut with the same subdued authority as the original. Everyone hears the echo of that readiness. Measurement manifests in CAD files balanced between historical fidelity and modern craft. Through design, the corpse's accessory speaks again. A group of sound artists in Melbourne gathers field recordings from beaches, morgues, steam trains and typewriters to create an immersive composition. The studio smells of solder and eucalyptus oil, and evidence lies in waveforms displayed across monitors, peaks representing gull cries or ink ribbon snaps. Reflection grows as they layer these sounds into crescendos that mirror the operation's tensions. Paper rustle bleeding into surf. Heartbeat subsonics merging with diesel engines. Silence is integral. They carve pockets of hush where listeners can almost hear the caliper's stillness. Measurement here is auditory, aligning decibel curves with the narrative's emotional arcs. When premiered in a dim theatre, the piece wraps audiences in vibrations that feel like midnight on a heaving sea. At a Quebecois winter festival, ice sculptors carve a tableau of the operation, working amid the crisp scent of snow and pine. Evidence informs their chisels, the submarine condensed in translucent blue, the attaché case carved from amber ice, the corpse implied by an indentation cradled in frosted blankets. Reflection emerges as visitors run mittens along the smooth surfaces, sensing how cold and water shape the mission. Silence accompanies snowfall, muffling voices as twilight paints the sculptures lavender. Measurement is visible in the grid lines etched into the ice blocks, reminiscent of the spreadsheets that partitioned responsibilities among spies. When the sun returns and the installation melts, rivulets trickle like whispers returning to the sea. On a Hawaiian research vessel tracking microplastics, the crew passes slow evenings reading diaries from wartime sailors. The galley smells of coconut curries and diesel, and evidence pipes through the ship's speakers as an audiobook recounts the mission. Reflection surfaces when a deckhand compares the drift of plastics to the corpse's journey. Both tiny, both capable of travelling unimaginable distances. Silence claims the deck after lights out, broken only by the hiss of bow spray and the rattle of sensors. Measurement manifests in the data sheets clipped to bulkheads, columns aligning with the same precision as the tide tables once used for deception. The story threads into their watch rotations, a lullaby syncing with the Pacific swell. In Nairobi's art school, students craft beadwork panels depicting global histories. One collaborative piece uses azure glass beads for the Atlantic, brass for the Atlantic, brass for the attaché case, and ivory seeds for the forged documents. Evidence translates through pattern, a spiral showing the deception's ripples, a row of crimson beads marking the German redeployment. Reflection arises as the students discuss how a man from Wales, an operation from London, and consequences across Mediterranean coasts intersect with their own artistic voices. Silence descends when they knot the final thread, honouring the subject with a moment of stillness. Measurement appears in the bead counts, each column matching the number of items tucked into Major Martin's pockets. The panel, shimmering under Nairobi's daylight, hums with the same gentle insistence as the caliper's locked jaw. Ancestral storytellers among the Sami people, intrigued by the tale, adapt it into joik, a vocal tradition that conjures places and spirits. Gathered around a fire inside a lavu scented with birch smoke, they chant melodies that rise and fall like swells. Evidence is abstract, woven into rhythm rather than fact, yet the joik evokes brass, salt, and clandestine footsteps with uncanny clarity. Reflection permeates their song, asking what it means for a wanderer's spirit to be borrowed by empires. Silence follows completion of the chant, the only sound the pop of sap in the firewood. Measurement here is communal breath, each inhalation calibrated to keep the joik's pulse steady. Through this northern lens, the corpse's odyssey becomes a universal meditation on stewardship of the nameless. Tech entrepreneurs in Singapore, building secure communication apps, cite mincemeat during brainstorming sessions scented with whiteboard markers and espresso. Evidence appears in slides showing how analog artifacts once carried the weight modern algorithms now bear. Reflection guides their ethos as they aim to design systems that resist manipulation, learning from the art of convincing falsehoods. Silence punctuates moments when a prototype fails, the disappointment tempered by respect for the past's ingenuity. Measurement surfaces in unit tests and code reviews, as precise as the original caliper's bite. The corpse's legacy infiltrates even this neon-lit lab, reminding developers that every message, true or false, rides on textures, timing, and trust. A pilgrim trail emerges along Andalusia's coast, where surfers, historians, and poets walk barefoot at dawn, tracing the corpse's drift route. The sand smells of iodine and fig leaves crushed underfoot. Evidence is intangible but potent. The chill of the water matching accounts of the morning discovery. The gull patterns echoing logbook sketches. Reflection takes hold as the walkers collect sea glass to place on the grave. Each shard a stand-in for a life saved. Silence reigns when they reach the tide line, listening to the rhythmic hush that once camouflaged the deception. Measurement reveals itself in steps counted, heartbeats paced to the surf's inhalation. They leave without souvenirs, only salt crust on their ankles and the story murmuring in their ears. In Dublin's pubs, Sainchai storytellers weave the saga into fireside sessions perfumed with peat smoke and barley. Evidence is dramatised through prop letters stained with tea, a pocket watch ticking faintly as it passes from hand to hand. Reflection wraps patrons in warmth as they consider how empathy was engineered through handwriting and perfume. Silence settles when the storyteller lowers his voice to describe the fisherman's reverence, the clink of glasses pausing mid-air. Measurement emerges in the cadence of the tale, paced so each revelation lands like a wave. Outside, cobblestones glisten under mist, echoing the Andalusian dawn yet to these listeners far away. In a Kenyan savannah research camp, conservationists compare their radio-collared elephant data to the operation's meticulous logging. The camp smells of acacia sap and paraffin lamps, and evidence lies in spreadsheets tracking herd movements with the same devotion once devoted to German divisions. Reflection arises as they discuss how narrative can direct attention, how a single compelling story, like that of Major Martin, can shift resources the way human-wildlife conflict stories must today. Silence blankets the campfire after dark, interrupted only by distant lion roars and the scratch of pens. Measurement continues under the stars, clipboards glowing from headlamp light, linking wartime deception to current efforts at safeguarding life. Ultimately, the caliper remains, its brass gleam tamed by glass, yet its locked jaws still an invocation to trust in detail. Every surrounding whisper, from virtual reconstructions to joiks, from uniform threads to beadwork, becomes a tide returning to this instrument that once pinched a letter to certainty. Evidence continues to proliferate, but never exhaust. Reflection grows richer with each new lens. Silence remains the padded room where respect echoes. The corpse that saved D-Day endures, not as a grisly footnote, but as a gentle reminder that compassion, when paired with precision, can bend history toward mercy. In the museum's dim evening, climate units hum like distant surf. Visitors breathe in metal and memory, and the story drifts onward, expanding yet always returning to the measured hush that began.